sure.
Slides first.
The first video, I should be, those are the slides, yeah, I should be in order. We're gonna have a complicated audio-visual thing here. And I'm gonna try not to take more than half an hour, but I'm not very good at that. Okay. Yeah, I'll start that in just a second. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's amazing to be here. This is my favorite kind of sort of presentation to do. The wisdom that is in this room is kind of mind-blowing if you think about it, even though we're only a few dozen people. But I want every one of you to realize that you have a piece of the puzzle, and I want you all to think about how you can activate your piece of the puzzle more powerfully going forward than you ever have before, and with courage and with a sense that you are super important in this. I will call it a real fight, maybe even a war, because I'm going to get into a little bit of scary stuff in my presentation a little bit, and I think that if this was 30 years ago when we were having this talk, I'd say we were probably going to avoid the worst damage and the largest number of deaths, and I don't think that that's possible anymore. So, and I think it's important to look at that honestly. So it's a war where I think a lot of lives over the next few decades are going to be lost, and we're going to be all called to show up in a real way, not on social media, not in a kind of shirking way where you don't want to have conflict and talk to people about hard things, but where we're going to be called on for wisdom, for conflict resolution, for food production, for security, for community, in a way that's going to be deeply human, probably really scary at times, and just going to ask for all of us. So I wanted you to kind of think about that a little bit. But yeah, I agreed with, I resonated with everything you all were saying about deep time and about processing climate emotions and about, how we are sitting in this environment with each other and how it's like a full person, sort of animal, mammalian thing, right? So I think in this capitalism that we have, where you can just order stuff on Amazon and it shows up, in a few hours at your door, we've kind of forgotten that we're mammals on a planet that need food and water and proper temperatures, and maybe most importantly, community to survive. Like, we're a particular kind of mammal that we die if we don't have community. So it's going to get real, and that's going to be scary, but in some ways it's going to be amazing. So okay, I'm going to start off by showing you a few videos. The first two are from this project I co-founded with a dear friend, Harold Moss, who lives in New York State, called the Climate Ad Project, and we recently changed to being the Undeniable Network. So this first video is about carbon offsets. We're trying to, one of the things that I see a lot out there in the public is just a great amount of ignorance. Like, I talk to people, I'm like, what do you think's causing climate change? And I much more often get the response like it's plastics, or it's not enough recycling, or it's not enough composting. Very few people actually tell me it's fossil fuels, right? And then the people who do understand that say going on long flights is not, I'm not saying that you necessarily shouldn't right now. Interestingly, so the no-fly, so I haven't flown since 2012. I never took a pledge not to fly. And all of my friends who go on flights, they always kind of come to me and sort of ask me for permission first, and they're all guilty, and they're like, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna take a flight somewhere. I'm like, I'm not the person who says whether you can fly or not. And would you please, if you are gonna fly, could you please be an advocate for ramping down that entire system of commercial aviation? So it's only 3 or 4% of the cause of global heating, because the cars and heating our buildings and the industry, all this other stuff we do, the animal agriculture, it's all that, those pieces are bigger pieces of what's causing global heating than just commercial aviation. But commercial aviation is growing exponentially, and I see it as a real luxury. Like, if we ended commercial aviation today, people would be inconvenienced, but nobody would die. Unlike if we kind of took fossil fuels out of agriculture today, or out of electricity, or out of heating homes, actually a lot of people would die, right? So it's harder to get fossil fuels out of those systems. Commercial aviation, we could end immediately if we wanted to. So I see it as a litmus test. You will know that society has transitioned into what I call climate emergency mode when the aviation industry stops growing exponentially but starts coming down. When you start seeing things like, tickets getting more expensive based on the number of miles that you've flown in the last year, or frequent flyer programs becoming illegal, things like that. Sort of the beginning of rationing, maybe nationalization of flying so that people, executives aren't making huge amounts of money killing our Earth, which goes 100 times more for the fossil fuel industry. But so I see flying as, it's really an interesting problem to me, because people freak out when they say, yeah, if we want to deal with global heating and Earth breakdown, we're going to have to stop flying. They're always like, well, what about electric planes? I'm like, they're good for like 300 or 400 miles, but right now the batteries are 10 times too heavy per unit of energy to go in planes and go across oceans. They're like, what about biofuels? And I'm like, well, yeah, we'd have to like change all of our, we'd have to cut down the Amazon rainforest, right, and grow vegetable oil for all the planes, right? There's just not enough I used to run a car on veg oil, right? So I know, I've done a lot of research into production of vegetable oil. There's just the scale of fuel used in commercial aviation and all the stuff we do, it's kind of mind-boggling. And like the fossil fuel industry, if you notice, they've been very careful that nobody knows how much stuff is actually going into your car or into the wings of those planes and being burnt and released into the atmosphere. When I was driving the veg oil car, I used to carry these 5-gallon vegetable oil jugs around. They weighed about 40 pounds, 80 pounds carrying it, lugging it around. And then it would take like, just one of those would make my car go 100 miles, right? We did one 6,000 mile trip, and we went up to Portland and to Chicago and then back to Los Angeles. And I had this this trailer full of these vegetable oil cubies. And I think it weighed like 3,000 pounds or something. There was one time in Oregon where I like detached it from the trailer hook, so we were gonna look at some like possible places to live, and I didn't realize that it was on a slight slope going down, and there was a canal right behind it, and I'm like struggling to keep this thing from going. I think I was like, put a log under the wheel or something like that. I'm like, this is gonna be like a big, I was thinking to myself, it's gonna be a big story, like climate scientist, like dumps toxic chemicals into canal, right? Because it's like used vegetable oil. So it's just a lot of stuff. You like fill up your car and the pump's going for a couple minutes, and it's just a lot of stuff. And we're talking like 40 billion tons per year of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, which is why the atmospheric CO2 fraction is going up more or less exponentially. It's starting to slow down a little bit, but since 1790, it's been going up at over, on average, 2% per year. So okay, so this is one video we made with a climate ad project a couple years ago, and I'm supposed to. Okay, so I'm gonna make it big. I'm gonna make it big first, and I'm gonna press play.
After the murder, meaning the murderer must be Lord Reginald.
Brilliant, Holmes! Bravo. But you failed to account for one thing. I purchased a murder offset. A what? I went to London to find Jack the Ripper and paid him not to murder for a month. So you see, Mr. Holmes, on the whole, the world is in fact a little less murdery. That's the stupidest shit I ever heard.
Yeah, and so that website, we cite a lot of research. Some of it's from ProPublica, other sources. I mean, carbon offsets, they are as stupid. It turns out they're just as stupid as they sound if you sort of think about it. And yet, they allow people, for example, to get on planes and then not feel guilty, right? It's this bullshit from the fossil fuel industry, which is keeping people who would otherwise be advocates for changing systems to not be advocates for changing systems, right? So they're very dangerous for that reason. Okay, here's a much more recent video we made after we changed into the undeniable network. Hold on a second, I gotta.
The last Infinity Stone, right?
Yes?
Giving me the power to do anything in the universe.
Yeah?
And then I snap my fingers. And boom! Half of all sentient life just disappears.
Wait, why again?
To stop overconsumption, why didn't you just use the Infinity Stones to distribute resources equitably and stabilize consumption within ecological limits to create a sustainable post-scarcity utopia? Shut up! That's why! Anyway, long story short, the Avengers stopped me. But it was still pretty cool.
Oh, very evil. Love the creativity.
Well, you know what that makes you, right? Makes you a loser.
Do you even know who you're talking to?
Yes, a fucking loser.
Who is this guy? Hey, you're that CEO, right? Oil, gas, coal.
I supply the world's energy demand. And I'm sick of listening to you dipshits complain about your glorious evil plans being ruined by some arsehole in a leotard. Pathetic.
Yeah, well, actual supervillains are having a conversation here, so get lost.
Do you know why you keep losing?
Why?
Because you believe you're actually the hero in your own story. Me, I gave that up long ago.
And what did you steal? Office supplies?
Oh, I've stolen much more than that.
Yeah? Like what?
The future.
I don't get it.
Think back. For a brief, shining moment, everyone knew fossil fuels were killing the planet. Global warming meant I needed to be out of business. So ask yourselves, why am I still here? Because I stole it. The future. I took it. And all I needed to do was limit what people believed was possible. I bought PR firms, ad agencies, politicians, think tanks, judges, my own experts, even men of God. And it worked. And no one could stop me because it was all perfectly legal. One of the perks of writing your own laws. You wanted to know who I am? I'm every gas-guzzling car on the road, every plane in the sky, every shitty piece of plastic in your house. I'm the food you eat and the air you breathe. I am the system. So when the seas swallow your cities, when your crops fail and your governments collapse, when the scorching heat kills millions, leaving the human detritus to inundate your borders, I'll be safe and sound, watching the end unfold from the comfort of my luxury bunk, secure in the knowledge that I won.
Yo, that's fucked up.
Yeah, that's
Be
absolutely
ashamed
insane.
of yourself.
Riddle me this, asshole! What am I supposed to do with my crime empire when Gotham is 6 feet underwater? Move to fucking Boise?
Oh my god, this guy's so evil! We have to let him into our club!
He's right. All in favor?
Aye!
Hey, next round's on me.
And then the credits roll. But okay, I'm gonna pause it there. So yeah, several years ago, I just posted on Twitter. I'm like, it's crazy that there's no kind of ad agency sticking up for the earth. And I also think it's crazy that the Biden administration hasn't done anything to push back against extremely well-funded disinformation spread by the fossil fuel industry. If I were president, that's like the first thing I would do, sign on day one. I'd like have an executive order that said, here's how much money we're gonna spend. We're gonna have billboards, we're gonna have radio spots, we're gonna have shows on PBS, just like things for classroom teachers pushing. The fossil fuel industry literally funds these like little textbooks for elementary education classes for teachers, especially in red states, that say climate change is a hoax, right? And so these teachers get these free materials and then teach this bullshit to the kids. You also notice that I don't shy away from saying swear words, right? Because this is a fucking emergency, and I think it was far too, the climate movement was being super polite for far too long. But yeah, so this is, we do this under the auspices of a 501c3 that I co-founded called Climate Science Education Project. We have big plans. The first couple of years, we were a group of like 5 volunteers. That's when we made the murder offset video, a bunch of other videos. We have a lot of videos that are kind of about current events. We had one when Amy Coney Barrett was in the process of being ordained into the Supreme Court. And she actually literally said that climate change was a matter of public debate and that it wasn't settled, right? So she's literally a climate denier. So we put out that video that went really viral. It featured a professor here at Duke who's a good friend of mine named Drew Shindell when he was testifying in front of Congress. He's just such a good job kind of bringing the science in a really serious and powerful way. So he was featured in that video. So we made a whole bunch of videos. Then we kind of burned out as a group because we were volunteers. And then eventually we got like a $60,000 grant from the Climate Emergency Fund. They're also friends of mine, although they super won't give us money again because they just like funding civil disobedience, and this doesn't quite, it's supports, but it's not actually civil disobedience. But we'll get to that in just a second. But yeah, I think that this is really important stuff. I still don't understand why me as a climate scientist at NASA, like why do I have to do this? I don't understand. Where are the people who are actually in media? Like why is a climate scientist co-founding a media group, a nonprofit media group, for pushing back against disinformation from the fossil fuel industry? And that's what I mean. Like, you guys are lawyers. You're, doing all this, whatever you're doing, right? You're doing all these different jobs, teaching, helping people, like taking care of people's health. I feel like we all need to step forward to do stuff like this. And there are a handful of lawyers that are doing things like starting to sue the fossil fuel industry, but it should be like hundreds. It should be thousands of lawyers doing that. I don't know why people aren't really showing up yet. I mean, I kind of do. It's sort of because the mainstream media is not doing a proper job letting the public know that this is a fucking climate emergency, right? So anytime people die in a climate fire on Maui, anytime there's climate flooding in Vermont, the New York Times runs an article, right? And it says, talks to some scientists saying like, this was 70% more likely because of global heating or whatever. They probably just say climate change. I'm very, very specific in the language I use. I use global heating, earth breakdown, climate change for very specific things, but I don't have time to talk about that right now, but what the New York Times doesn't say, for example, there's 3 really important things that they should say every single time there's a climate disaster, and they never say it, and it drives me insane because they're these fucking gatekeepers for our culture. The New York Times, in my opinion, is doing so much to prevent climate action around the world. I've pitched so many op-eds to their opinion desk, and they're always like, how does this advance the conversation? I'm like, no one's ever said this before. That's how it advances the conversation. And then they'll publish something about the importance of veganism, and it's like literally a story that's been written 1,000 times in various forms, right? It just drives me crazy. The 3 things they need to start saying every time there's a climate disaster. Number 1, this is because of the fossil fuel industry. That's part of the story. They're not doing good reporting if they leave that out. Number 2, the fossil fuel industry has been literally lying and colluding to disinform the public, contribute to politicians' campaigns, and block action and write their own laws through like ALEC and various other mechanisms, right? And they've been doing that for half a century. And they just promised in 2021 to keep doing it, and I can talk about that a little bit. 6 fossil fuel executives went and testified under oath in front of Congress. They were asked repeatedly if they would stop spending money to spread disinformation and block action, and they refused to do that. They blathered and filibustered, and Ro Khanna was like, all right, you're filibustering. Technically, legally speaking, I take that as a no. You are not going to stop spending to spread disinformation, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing the New York Times has to say anytime there's a climate disaster, and they don't, is what's going to happen 10 years from now, what's going to happen 20 years from now, what's going to happen 50 years from now, because this is all a trend. And every molecule of carbon dioxide, every gram of oil or gas or coal that's burned makes the planet a little bit hotter irreversibly, right? And so the public just doesn't know. So on that note, something else I do that I think is really important is civil disobedience. So I'm going to play one more video for you. So I'm here because scientists are not being listened to. I'm willing to take a risk for this gorgeous planet, for my sons. And we've been trying to warn you guys for so many decades that we're heading towards a fucking catastrophe. And we've been being ignored. The scientists in the world have been being ignored. And it's gotta stop. We're gonna lose everything. And we're not joking. We're not lying. We're not exaggerating. This is so bad, everyone, that we're willing to take this risk, and more scientists and more people are gonna start joining us. This is for all of the kids of the world, all of the young people, all of the future people. This is so much bigger than any of us. So that's probably enough. That was the first time I risked arrest and then eventually was arrested, and Sharon came and she was there with me, and I felt like the next day there is a pretty good chance I'd get fired from my job. And but it was probably one of the most powerful things I've done in my entire life. And because somehow I was able to tap into the emotion in that moment, and it actually got caught in film, it went super viral. Especially outside of the US, everything I do, frustratingly, does better outside of the US, because I think just the individualism here and there's this narrative that you have to be hopeful and you can't scare people too much. And a lot of moderate climate advocates, I think, use that to get on MSNBC and to get on CNN and to get into the New York Times. But those venues, I feel like they don't want to highlight the voices that are, kind of threatening to the status quo and threatening to the system. And so, but especially in developing nations, they don't have that same thing. Like, I was just on Bolivian national TV a couple of days ago, and it was amazing, and it has a really big impact in a country like that. So, okay, I bet you, how much time do I have? Is it negative, or can I go 5 more minutes? Oops, this is the wrong one. This is Natalia's. I can go here, and then I can click on this. So this is it. Oh, okay, sorry. So I'll go through this really fast. I just wanted to say that I wanted to give you a scope of what I do and who I am, so that we could just kind of prime the discussion, because that's kind of the main thing. This slide, to me, it represents deep time, represents the planet, it represents the cosmos. This that bright galaxy there, well, that's the Milky Way, of course, and then that's the Andromeda galaxy, which is heading straight towards us. It's gonna show up in about 3.7 billion years. This is the pale blue dot, that's our planet. This is from a NASA JPL satellite, literally orbiting Saturn, taking a photo of the fucking Earth. And I'm there waving up at everybody, because we all went out at JPL, we all went outside and we're like, oh, Cassini's gonna take a photograph of Earth, and we're facing Saturn right now, so wave, everyone. So it's super cool. So I'm literally waving. Everything we know, all of human history, all of our drama, all of our love, all of our conflict is happening on that pale blue dot, and it's super fragile. That's what we know now. This is ocean heat content increasing over the last several years. 93% of the excess energy coming into the Earth relative to what's going out from the Earth is going into the oceans. Global surface temperature, same story. This is the CO2 fraction. Like I said, I just fitted this with a dumbass exponential curve with 2 parameters. And so it starts in about 1790, which is, I think, the cotton gin, right? It wasn't an Eli Whitney, like the start of the Industrial Revolution, basically coal, and then it's increasing at 2.2% per year on average. No matter where you look in the Earth system, you see just when I was an astrophysicist before 2012, like when I first started being a climate activist in 2006, there was a lot of discussion about whether the climate signal had already been emerging in the Earth system, like how if you could pull it out with subtle data science techniques from the data sets. Now it's just like this huge, strong signal that's everywhere you look in the Earth system, and storms getting more severe, and plants and animals, both in the ocean and on land, moving towards the poles. Ice sheets melting, glaciers melting, the sea expanding thermally and sea level rising. So no matter where wildfire is getting worse, just like there's no part of the living Earth really that you can look at and not see the imprint of global heating. We're at 1.3 degrees Celsius above where we would be if we hadn't been burning all this fossil fuel. And it's increasing roughly at a tenth of a degree Celsius every 5 years. So in about 10 years, in the early 2030s, we'll be at 1.5 degrees Celsius. But it looks like it might be accelerating somewhat. The last 15 years have been increasing, the global mean temperature has been increasing about 40% faster than from 1970 to like 2000. We all know what this summer was like. It was insane. Climate scientists, in my opinion as a climate scientist, we climate scientists do not understand exactly why 2023 was so different than 2022 and 2021. We got kind of used to a little bit of increase every year, and then suddenly 2023 happened and it blew away everything, and that's very concerning to me. This is the work that I do. What my favorite project is looking at future projections of how extreme humidity and heat is going to affect human bodies around the world. It's a lot to unpack in a very short amount of time. I can't. So the top two rows, that's the baseline 1890s average, 1990s average. What I'm showing, the colors, that's the number of days per year over a particular threshold of humid heat, which is what an ideally healthy human, perfectly acclimatized to heat, couldn't do better in hot and humid conditions, will experience hyperthermia, which is when their core body temperature starts to increase and they start to go into heat stroke. During the hottest part of the day, just walking, that's what light work means. So that if you're running a marathon, then this would be even more purple, right? And if you're lying in bed resting, it would be less purple because your metabolic rate exposes you more or less to extreme humidity conditions. But you can see that in the 2190s and the 2290s. Then the columns, the two right-hand columns, that's for if humanity prioritizes growth over climate mitigation, which is what we're literally doing right now. Like, look at, I hate the Republicans with a passion. They're evil and awful, and they say climate change is a hoax. But President Biden and this White House, they've still been expanding fossil fuel basically just as fast as Trump ever did. And it doesn't matter whether the CO2 molecule is emitted by a Democrat president or a Republican president, it's gonna heat the planet exactly the same way. So we are literally on this like prioritizing growth over mitigation scenario. The one on the left, that's if we seriously prioritize mitigation. You can see in the 2090s, 2190s, it kind of peaks out in the 2090s, basically 2100, and then eventually the temperatures slowly start to come down. But under the growth scenario, the non-mitigation scenario, everything just kind of blows up after 2100, and the whole planet basically turns purple, which means almost every single day per year in that location is going to be beyond this dangerous heat threshold. And this is the same thing, but for an even more extreme threshold. So these are fatal humid heat conditions. You'll die if you're exposed to them for more than a few minutes while you're at rest, lying down at bed at the coolest time of day in the middle of the night. And remember, this is for an ideally healthy person. So if you have any pre-existing conditions, you're taking certain medications, you're above the age of 60, so you're not perspiring as much, it's going to be much, much worse than this. But this is like an average climate sensitivity model. It basically, well, this one's slightly hotter than average, this one's average. But before 2100, you don't see this anywhere on Earth, this extreme conditions. After 2100, if we don't mitigate, you have these wide swaths in the tropic where, some places, over 100 days per year are beyond these conditions. So that's essentially uninhabitability, right? So I'm almost done. I'm going to skip this. We can talk about it in Q&A if you want, but this is the irreversibility stuff. This is biodiversity. Going back to deep time, like my experience of deep time is, holy shit, I want to get arrested as much as I can, because it's going to, the damage we're doing right now, these few years, will last for 10 million years, right, in terms of biodiversity loss. That's the longest time scale of global heating impacts. This was an op-ed I wrote that went live yesterday in Newsweek. COP28 is a sick joke. You should be angry and afraid. You can read it. It's in Newsweek. Just Google Newsweek Kalmus and you'll find it. The thing that's interesting is I have a really good relationship with this Newsweek editor, and I can use that venue as a way to shift language around climate change. So I even used the word bullshit. He changed it to crap. But basically, I don't pull any punches when I talk about the fossil fuel industry and how the United Nations has been corrupted. I say that these are basically, I named those 6 CEOs who testified in 2021 and explained that whole thing. I basically say they're like among the most evil human beings on the entire planet. It's easy to imagine an alternate universe in which fossil fuel executives were like, hey, we already have more money than we know what to do with, so maybe let's not destroy the planet. But in reality, of course, fossil fuel executives made the opposite choice, to spend billions to hire the best and brightest to spread disinformation and block action. I think we'll save this for discussion. I have like a kind of a three-pronged idea of how to make change, which we can talk about. You develop yourself first. You engage in what Gandhi called constructive program. That means joining together, doing stuff like this, doing stuff like what Saskia is doing with the Duke Farm, creating a climate resilient community, right? That's constructive program, taking care of each other and starting to build the alternative. Super important. And then the third one is the civil disobedience and the blowing up pipelines and all of that, right? And that's the tip of the iceberg. And you can't really do that effectively if you haven't done the other two. Like, to do civil disobedience, it took, for the 4 of us that got arrested in the action that I showed, there were like 20 other people that were supporting us. And then to be the ones to get arrested and take that risk, we had to do serious inner work, right, to be ready for that. And I can tell you, it was scary as fuck to get arrested like that. 100 cops in riot gear showed up. I thought I was gonna get fired. I didn't know how my colleagues would react to it. I didn't know what was, you're jumping into this uncertainty, like you don't know what you're gonna get charged with or how serious it's gonna be. So you can't do that unless you've done that inner work, which for me involves a lot of meditation. This is my slide for the inner work. This is my slide for the constructive program. Bees are super awesome and I love them. And this is the slide for the Satyagraha. I also study coral reefs. So yeah, I hope I've inspired you to kind of dig a little deeper, to work together, to support each other, to make even more change than you've been doing. And this is what the night sky is going to look like in 3.7 billion years when Andromeda is just about to crash into the Milky Way. You know, I don't know, like, I feel really called. I feel really grateful to exist as a human being in this body and to be here with you guys and to be here with Sharon and my boys. You know, we all owe everything to this planet. And I think the planet is, it's a living being. And, you know, anyway, it's the privilege of a lifetime to be called to serve it and to give back. So thank you.